Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com, and unauthorized.tv. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you, and happy to see that we're back in full effect. So tonight we're going to talk about the poverty of evil. And what I mean by that is something that you notice again and again and again and again if you happen to be paying any attention to modern entertainment today. Now, this may surprise some of you, but I do actually watch the occasional television show and the occasional movie. This isn't necessarily by my natural preference, but when you are a human being, you are fundamentally a social creature, whether you want to consider yourself one or not. And so from time to time, you find yourself doing things that you might not do if you're entirely alone. So anyhow, one of the television shows that Space Bunny and I have liked to watch over the past, few years. We don't watch TV or Netflix or anything. We watch things completely out of order and so forth. And also, before I was married, I really didn't watch any television at all from about 1987 to around 1995 or 1996. So I have this amazing ignorance gap with a lot of television shows that are pretty popular. For example, I'd never seen Beverly Hills 90210. I've never seen Seinfeld. I think I actually watched about 5 minutes of Seinfeld once when I was waiting for somebody to get ready. So pretty much that entire era of television back when NBC was dominant, I just missed all of it. So my TV vocabulary tends to be a little bit off. And these days, there's a lot more offerings. They certainly have a broader spectrum of television shows to a certain extent, because it only seems to extend to the negative. It only seems to extend to the anti-Christian, the anti-positive, etc., etc. But I always find interesting shows and music that deals with the supernatural. For example, and so the show that I'm talking about specifically now is Supernatural, which is it's a minor show. It's on some minor network, and it's never been a massively popular show or anything. But it's very interesting to me, especially as a fantasy author who occasionally delves into that sort of territory, as you may recall with my Eternal Warriors books. But and you don't expect reasonable Christian theology out of these folks, even when they're borrowing from it, even when they're using it. But what I found really intriguing is that this is the final season of Supernatural, And what you can see them doing is essentially fully giving themselves over to the Promethean narrative. Not the whole of the narrative, but what I would call the core of the narrative. Because what you're seeing is an attempt to retroactively justify the rebellion of man against God. In some ways, it's a little bit ironic because, of course, the big villain is initially supposed to be Lucifer and so forth, and they go around and they begin killing witches, killing demons, and all this sort of thing. But then, as the story has gone on, welcome Moon Jazz Bear, as the story has gone on, now it's twisted to the point that God is the bad guy. God is the ultimate bad guy. And it's really kind of fascinating. What I do find fascinating about it is that this inversion in some ways is worse spiritually, supernaturally. It is considerably worse than the sort of inversion that we see in Marvel, all the petty sexual stuff and so forth. And it's also interesting too in terms of what it gets right in some ways, in terms of the perspective of God the author. And of course, Supernatural has always been pretty good at the meta aspects of it, where if you haven't seen it, just deal with it. Or it's been around long enough that I don't think that we can worry about spoilers and so forth. But there is actually a phenomenal twist where the author of the Supernatural novels inside the TV universe turns out to be God. But what's really interesting about it, and this is where I'm talking about this is where we tie it back to the concept of the poverty of evil. Well, all they can do, the best that they can come up with, storyline wise, is to essentially make God behave like Lucifer. Even down to the point of, sitting in a casino, pointlessly gambling, winning over and over and over and over and over again, and having slaughtered everyone in the casino except for the one terrified waitress, who he then taunts and mocks her fear. There's a little joke, you didn't put too much rum in it, did you? Because, you wouldn't want me to get cranky, and of course she's just terrified. And so when you look at this, you're thinking, that's the best you can do? God is bored, and he's so devoid of creativity that he'll just sit there racking up petty victories over a rigged casino machine. It's really fascinating to see how they've got nothing else. When you look, the funny thing is that so much of our entertainment and our stories and so forth, they all come from the same source. They all come from the Bible and the Greco-Roman mythologies. If once you've read Dante, you really cease to be impressed by so much of the so-called creativity of the authors that you've read and enjoyed. I was really very, very disappointed when, uh, after reading the Misplaced Legion series by Harry Turtledove, and just thinking that he had, really created this amazing new world, I didn't realize that all he did was dip into Byzantine history. He basically took a Roman legion and had them travel through some sort of vortex of time and space into an alternate universe that was basically a magic Byzantine empire. And it was really intriguing to see how um, how they can't come up with anything new. And it's really a bit amusing to me where if you look at, for example, the difference between my A Throne of Bones, Arts of Dark and Light series versus a Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, you can kind of see the same dynamic at work. Because evil, the wicked, they can't create. They can't come up with anything new. And so, because they're trying to come up with something new, then they're unable to focus on the stuff that really matters, which is the moral questions. How do you have moral questions when you are dealing with something that is fundamentally nihilistic? And so, um, now I'm not saying that the show is terrible, and in fact, I think arc. But um, when you look at the way that they're trying to justify evil in shows like Lucifer, and how they're trying to justify rebellion against God and trying to make you accept a hopeless, nihilistic message, that's when you start to realize how inverted these stories are. Um, Animatronic says, how would you make a better evil character? Um, well, the first thing about making a proper evil character is that the evil character has to believe he's good. Evil doesn't regard itself as evil. That's why, I have no patience for all the shows that are, um, all the shows that have the um, pointless sort of laughing. You can always tell who is supposed to be the evil character because uh, they smile. It's an eerie smile, and that's how you know they're bad. Makes no sense. It makes no sense. Odd Rob is right. Devil Mouse bad guys are always just misunderstood and really did the wrong things for the right reasons. Exactly. And so um, now you can say, well, why why watch these things? Well, you have to, if you're going to beat them, you have to know how it works. You have to understand how it works. You have to learn the art that is being that is utilized. And like I said, I actually think that there are some interesting aspects to it, but it does start to become extraordinarily predictable. Um, when you start to once you realize what the basic tricks are and so forth. It was a little disappointing in the episode that we watched tonight because it was very clear, you know, as soon as there was a warm greeting with an old friend, you're just waiting to find out that he's bad now. A little bit disappointing, a little bit too predictable. Um, and so when you see the poverty, that's when you also have the ability to understand the richness and depth of things that are good. Why why do things like Watership Down and The Dark is Rising stick with us in a way that his Dark Materials never will? Because it's in harmony with the truth of creation. You know, the reason that The Lord of the Rings resonates for so many of us is because the virtues that it describes, the dilemmas that are faced by the characters, are in some way similar and stuff, almost never show you. So, um, when Sage Bear says, I started watching his Dark Materials on HBO, it's so bad. Yeah, I read a little bit of it just because I had heard that, his goal was to be the anti C.S. Lewis and so forth. And so I read a little bit of it and laughed and said, yeah, good luck. Um, People will still be reading the Chronicles of Narnia long after this book is totally forgotten. you know, but then again, there are interesting elements that they do bring into it in terms of. I mean, some of the questions that they do bring up are interesting because they are the interesting questions that atheists have about philosophy. Some of them are good questions. Why did God create us? And I think that the answer, um, you know, and why create free will? The answer to me, I think, is actually fairly reasonable and so forth. Um, and so, we don't know, we can't know, but the idea um, that we're given free will in order to see what choices we make is at least logical, is at least consistent with our experience. Did you love The Hobbit as much as the trilogy? No, but I do enjoy it thoroughly. Um, I mean, it's an excellent tale. It's a wonderful fantasy tale, but it is not. It doesn't have the ponderous majesty of the full work. Yeah, Joey Grassi is right. Catcher in the Rye is one of those books you hate 10 pages into it. Yeah, it's totally inexplicable to Generation X. The appeal of The Catcher in the Rye is totally inexplicable to Generation X. I read it and I couldn't believe that this was supposed to be some sort of paragon. It was just crazy. And it's not a book that I would recommend reading, just because it's so unpleasant. It's basically just an immersion into the gamma mindset, and uh, I just, yeah, all those 50s must read tomes, can't stand them. Yeah, because that's when the avant-garde had begun to poison the culture already. That's part of the poisoning of the culture. And so, um, if you haven't read it, you're fortunate. It's not the worst book I've ever read, but it is among the more unpleasant. And so, uh, again, the the good, the beautiful, and the true. Obviously, some of the stuff that I write has pretty awful stuff in it, but it's there for a reason. It's not there to wallow in it. It's there to make the color show up. If you write in pallid shades of gray, nothing stands out. If you write using true blacks, bright colors, a full range of pastels to jewels, you end up with a much more effective and much more memorable and much more meaningful work, in my opinion. I've written a bit about this, how the methodic excision of Christianity from literature has significantly harmed the quality of literature. You know, and when you look, when yeah, for example, Lord of the Flies is more powerful because it deals more directly with the darker side of human nature. You know, but when you look at, it's interesting too. I got an email today. I'm not usually a I'm not usually a fan of uh, quoting fan mail and so forth. Let me see, but this is perhaps actually I deleted it. So that's how much I'm not into it. But the thing is, a lot of people who only know me through the Darkstream don't realize that I'm actually a fairly serious novelist. And it was interesting to get an email from someone who clearly had only encountered me through YouTube. And he said he's like 100 pages into A Throne of Bones and was really enjoying it. But he said he was mostly really surprised by it because he said it just wasn't what he was expecting. And so I'm not going to search through my trash folder. My trash folder is way too ginormous to even try to find one email that I got today. Excuse me. But so for those of you who are actually into reading and that sort of thing, you might find A Throne of Bones or Quantum Mortis to surprise you a little bit. Actually, I suppose a lot of people are just getting exposed to Quantum Mortis now because of the replatforming, and so that's good. Now, moving on to yeah, okay. Somebody asked, what are some good authors? John C. Wright is a very good one. One of the best. As in terms of literary quality and creativeness, China Mieville is really good, but very not Christian. In fact, his best book is actually one of the best fictional explications of evil not viewing itself as evil. The one about the aliens, the aliens who speak. They speak with two voices at once. I can't remember the name of that, but it's his best book in my opinion, and it's really intriguing. Nick Cole is really good. Not the Galaxy's Edge stuff. I mean, frankly, I'm not impressed by those, but his Old Man and the Wasteland books, his zombie book that we publish, and his Soda Pop Soldier, they are much better than you would expect. So, Uh, I was going to try to quote the fan mail. I just didn't keep it, just because it was relevant. But um, what do you think of Colin McCarthy? Colin McCarthy, or anyhow, if he's the guy that wrote The Road, I don't like his stuff at all. I don't. I don't like him stylistically. I don't like him thematically. Embassy Town. That's it. Embassy Town is an excellent book. Um, I like Gene Wolfe, but I don't love Gene Wolfe. What are your thoughts on Richard Carrier trying to say Jesus was made up? Richard Carrier is a uh, pathetic, immoral, sad excuse for a pseudo intellectual who doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not even he's not to be taken seriously in any way, shape, or form. I've addressed one or two of the things that he's written. He's a third-rate Richard Dawkins, and you know what I think about Richard Dawkins. Um, I mean, Carrier's a complete joke. John Beckham says, I would never pick up a book called Soda Pop Soldier on my own. No, no, nor I. But it's a really good book, and Pop Cult Warlord is also good, and Control Alt Revolt is also very good. Yeah, they're all part of the same series, all really good. Yes, I've read Ursula K. Le Guin. Um, she's massively overrated. The Left Hand of Darkness is her only worthwhile book. Yes, Vonnegut is overrated, significantly overrated. Um, Michael Crichton is, he was just a pop cultural, you know, idea of the moment guy. He was probably propped up, would be my guess, but he was really good at reading, being one step ahead of the popular tastes. Yeah, I've read the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen. Uh, Very interesting, uh, very chaotic, very disjointed. I'd have to reread Embassy Town before I could go into any detail. You do a search for it on my blog, though. I'm pretty sure I've written about it. So, um, congratulations, Alicia. She's finished her autobiography and it's published. Go ahead and post the link in the if you've got it published on Amazon, please post the link in the chat. Um, yeah, Michael Crichton is he's just he's like Stephen King, only not as bad. He's kind of like Stephen King, only considerably less evil and with an editor. But it's just pop thriller stuff. Once you what you read Crichton for is to see how he implements the idea. All of his books have an idea. His books are fundamentally about ideas. And that's not a bad thing, you know, especially for somebody who's a good Delta thriller writer. Um, Orson Scott Card started off with a real bang, obviously. Um, and Xenocide is actually a really good book. And then the series pretty much turns into, more or less generic science fiction. I'm not, uh, I respect Card, but I don't find his stories fundamentally particularly interesting myself. Are any of Brian Herbert's books good? No, they are very much not good. His father's books are good, increasingly esoteric as the Dune series goes on. But even some of the stuff like the White Plague and stuff are interesting. He's got some interesting ideas and so forth. The Wheel of Time is horrendous. It is horrendously, horrifically bad. Um, you know, David, the Belgariad, which is exactly the same as the Malorian or whatever it's called. I mean, it's funny because it's like all the two books. It's like he repeated the same five books twice. Um, but those are not bad. I mean, they're what the Wheel of Time could have been if the author was a much better author and wasn't hung up and hadn't written what had been the most irritating character in all of fantasy literature until Patrick Rothfuss came along. I wouldn't have thought it was possible to write a character more intrinsically annoying than Randall Thor until uh, until trying to read the name of the wind. It was unbelievably bad. I mean, the thing about Wheel of Time, I mean, I was actively rooting for the bad guys. I disliked almost all the good guys, and especially the main character, so much. I know Wheel of Times is not the worst I've read. It's terrible, but it's bad. Yeah, Weber should have stopped Honor Harrington long before he did. Kavoth, that's it. Kavoth. He's so bad. Um, Joe Abercrombie. Joe Abercrombie's pretty good. I actually one of my chapters in A Throne of Bones is a homage to one of his chapters, which of course is an homage to Kenneth Branagh's Henry V, which is probably an homage to some other movie thing that I don't know about. Um, it's a chapter called The Crows, and you might find that interesting if you get to that, if you read that far into A Throne of Bones. Have you read the Witcher books? Yes. Um, wasn't impressed with them. They started off okay. Actually, they started off pretty interesting, but I have heard the English translations are inferior. And then it just got worse and worse as it went on. So I was underwhelmed. Um, the Yeah, there's still a Vox recommended reading list. There's a number of recommended reading lists on Castalia Direct. So just go to the blog and click on print editions. You'll see. Um, the worst book I've ever read was I wish I'd kept it. It was so bad that I actually threw it away. I think it might have been a um, what was that? Shadowrun. I think it was called Shadowrun. That sort of fantasy cyberpunk melange that was a role playing game. I think probably from the people that published BattleTech. Um, Anyhow, it was it was so unbelievably unbelievably bad. Um, and I'll never forget like this one scene where this guy is going to find his lover, and they've escaped from somewhere, and she's in a trailer, and she's just opened the door, and she's standing framed in the door, and of course he's just amazed by how beautiful she is and all that sort of thing. And then the trailer gets hit by a bazooka fired by a flying elf with wings that has popped up. it was it was so bad. It was. I mean, I don't know what the name of it is, but it was unbelievably bad. You know, I mean, it wasn't just. I mean, it was also the way that the flying, not only the bazooka attack, but the existence of the um, flying elves themselves were were it just came out of nowhere, all of it. And so the fact that the author had tried to set up this this romantic tragic scene. But it was all very influenced by a movie. I mean, whoever wrote this was clearly uh, was clearly influenced by the movies, not by books. And it was just unbelievably bad. Uh, Linjin says, "Why do you hate Wheel of Time but not Dune? Both subvert heroism." Because my literary judgment does not revolve around whether heroism is subverted or not. First of all, that's not true entirely. Um, I mean, I hate Wheel of Time because it is badly written, because the characters are just uninteresting, highly annoying people, and the story is boring. Dune is a fascinating creation. It's one of, if not the greatest science fiction novel ever published. Um, it's got an epic scale to it. It's got an epic. It feels like epic fantasy. It's the funny thing is, it's not actually quite as well written as I thought it was. When I reread it a couple of years ago, I was actually struck by, this is actually my thought was this is actually doable. Like this is something that um, I could imagine someone being able to write, as opposed to some of the stuff that Tolkien does, some of the stuff that Umberto Eco does, some of the stuff that Herman Hesse does. I find it difficult, or even like Watership Down, Richard Adams. I find it very difficult to imagine somebody being able to reach those heights. Dune is a little bit more accessible than I would have thought. Not entirely, but um, he just did such a great job of blending a number of diverse elements and really kind of coming up with something that felt very new and original. And in terms of subverting heroism, uh, I totally disagree. You know, I think that Paul Atreides is heroic. I think that the, I mean, I think that Leto, his son, is extraordinarily heroic. And that's why, he literally sacrifices his humanity and accepts the hell of living for 1,000 years for the benefit of humanity. And it's interesting, and this is made very clear by the author, just in case you didn't catch it, because his twin sister uh, says he was always the strong one. She understands that what he's not doing it for power, and he's not doing it because he wants to uh, live forever. He's doing something that he knows is going to be terrible, you know, and he does it. He literally, and in fact, Leto is more of a Christ figure than most characters that people see as Christ characters, because Leto literally lays down his life, sacrifices his humanity for all of man, for the human race. So, um, Tales from Watership Down are totally forgettable. Um, it's I was disappointed with them. Uh, how about Jack London? I've read the Miles Mathis stuff on Jack London, which I find interesting. But Call of the Wild is a great book, and um, you know, it's it's very haunting, especially for any dog lover. So, um, but it's I like Jack London always he always seems to eventually there's always a uh, not always, but there's usually a tragic element. Like I remember the story about the young boxer, and um, but it's White Fang is also pretty good, but um, but he's not one of my favorites or anything. But I think he's kind of a couple of his books are must reads if you're a young reader. Um, what time is it? Yeah, let's do some super chats before I have to go. So, M. Bolster kicks things off, doing his thing. Thank you. 10 Bennison says JBTFO Kur Gay. I think he's um, trying to say that he is a fan of Jay Dyer's work on Catholic dogma. Submitted to Christ says, have you ever played any of the Risk custom maps in StarCraft or Warcraft? It's Risk in real time. No, I have not. Usually when we actually have a Roman Risk that they sell in Italy that is really, frankly, not very good. I prefer the classic Risk. And Darth Pliskin says Raymond E. Feist is underrated. His Serpent War Saga is a really good Delta story. Yeah, I know Raymond Feist. Haven't had any better than most people tend to think of it. If you like fantasy, try The Hobbit or something. Let's see. What book do you recommend people not read because of its toxicity? 12 Rules for Life. And possibly Maps of Meaning. I would also actually stay away from all books that are written by talking heads that are not real writers. The Ben Shapiro's and the Bill O'Reillys and people like that. My Shield is discussed major Tolkien theme, evil cannot make, only mock. Well, that's correct. I mean, it's not surprising that he would pick up on that. Cossacks Defenders of Orthodox Christianity said, reading Hamlet in school, anything to gain from it? Well, yeah, his use of language, if nothing else. I mean, Shakespeare has his reputation for a reason. He's legitimately one of the greatest writers, even though it's well known that he, took a lot of liberties borrowing from other writers. But when someone as great as Shakespeare does what he does with the material, he's welcome to it. Do you rate any comic book writers particularly high? No, I understand why Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman are considered to be the best of the best, but as writers, they're in between mediocre and good. They're not, a decent novelist is much better than the very best comic book writers. The legend Chuck Dixon, of course, is excellent, and it's unsurprising that his books are just as good. I mean, he does stuff. Alt Hero Q number 3 and number 4 are just phenomenal. I'm looking forward to getting them out soon. Bear Judenbeer says, hello, unrelated question. What do you think of a comedy about the story of Shaka Zulu starring a morbidly obese red-headed Scottish guy as Shaka Zulu? I would watch that. I think that could be very funny. Hope this goes towards delicious wine. Enjoy, sir. I will make sure to do that. Binks Web Elf said, Vox actually read Maps of Meaning? Yeah, I read the whole thing. That's how I wrote Jordanetics. It's total nonsense. Oh no, Alan Moore doesn't suck. Alan Moore, I've read his Jerusalem. I mean, he would be a much better writer if he had a decent editor. Jerusalem would have been a much better book if he'd cut it down by about a quarter to a third. But I mean, what a lot of people don't realize is Chuck Dixon has some really good books. We're doing some of his audiobooks of of his novels. That's how you know he's a really good writer, because really good writers can write in any format. You know, people tend to um, people tend to forget that I write a fairly broad spectrum of work, from nonfiction on economics and philosophy to uh, fantasy to science fiction and so forth. And I write short stories. I write 950-page epic fantasies. Um, my range is considerably broader than most. Somebody said, "Are those all Eastern Press editions behind you, or do you have a couple of Franklin stuck in?" Those are all Franklin. I don't have a single Eastern Press book. In fact, this book I have right here is actually a Franklin Library signed first edition from Umberto Eco. I have it here because we were working on Castalia Deluxe tonight, and uh, we were just wanting to compare notes on what we're trying to do. This is the standard. This is the minimum standard that we are attempting to hit. So Castalia Deluxe is going to be absolutely awesome. If you're seriously into books, you should seriously think about subscribing to it at some point. Is comic book writing a challenge for you? A little bit. Finding the time to do it can be tough, and I can't meander the way that I can. Tony Drillard says I've largely irrelevant in terms of who is correct and who's not. Although I do think the comment of the debate was was so. If you're an annual member who hasn't gotten an invite yet, don't spiral. Just be patient, and please come join us on Social Galactic. We'll look forward to seeing you. It's not very feature rich, but we're improving it steadily, and so we're going to keep inviting new groups of people. So if you're an unauthorized subscriber, you will get an invite. And we haven't settled yet on what the subscription prices will be, but they'll probably be on the order of 5 for bronze, 15 for silver, and 25 for gold. Those are subscriptions just to Social Galactic. But of course, you can always subscribe to unauthorized. That's another way to do it. So we will get there. Also, Zammy Pup's campaign is very close to the $5,000 goal. Please consider supporting that. Slap Weasel has posted the link above. Thank you, Bradley Haas. He did his thing. Appreciate that. And one last question that I'm going to answer is, if you could pause time, what would you work on? Number one, I'd get A Sea of Skulls finished, and number two, I would write a economic version of Summa Theologica. I'll call it Summa Economica. And on that note, I will say good evening. We'll look forward to seeing you the next time. I'm Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.